It's the 2008 Singapore Grand Prix, F1's first ever night race. Everything seems pretty normal, but little did we know that once the lights went out, we'd witness one of the most scandalous and historic racing events ever to take place in the motorsport world, or sporting world for that matter. Let's talk a little bit about what was happening in 2008. Renault just got back their two-time world champion Fernando Alonso from McLaren. The bad news was that the car was utterly awful and was nowhere good enough to contest for wins and championships. Alonso would move to Renault to partner Nelson Piquet Jr., who is actually the brother of Max Verstappen's girlfriend. And he also might be the son of F1 world champion and legend Nelson Piquet. So like I said, Renault were not doing well whatsoever. They'd only picked up a couple of points and an outlandish podium at the German Grand Prix, where Piquet would claim his second place at the Hockenheim, his only Formula 1 podium. Alonso surprisingly started the weekend well, finishing fastest in the last two practice sessions. Unfortunately for Alonso, just as it always is, he had mechanical issues in qualifying. This would ruin any chance of him being anywhere near the front, and he would only start 15th for the Singapore Grand Prix, only one position in front of Piquet. Well, it was lights out and away we go, and everything seemed relatively normal until we got to lap 12. See, this is back when Formula 1 had refueling in races. The team had gone for a very odd strategy, starting to have a lower fuel load for the opening stint. This should have meant they'd be able to pass the traffic and make up positions early, but due to that traffic, that hindered Alonso, and he wasn't really able to get past many people, and he only ended up in 11th. So on lap 12, he decided to refuel and put on some fresh tyres. So now he was stuck where he started, and had no chance of getting anywhere near the front unless there was some sort of safety car. And suspiciously, that's exactly what happened. Just 2 laps later, the safety car is called out, thanks to Nelson Piquet Jr. having hit the wall coming out of turn 17. The right rear of Piquet's car smashed into the side of the wall, and luckily for Alonso, it was in a very dangerous spot on track. This meant the safety car was definitely going to be called out. But thanks to the rules of 2008, drivers weren't allowed to pit during a safety car period. This is obviously very different to modern Formula 1, where we're used to teams pitting all the time under the safety car. This creates interesting strategy and things like that. But of course in 2008, this couldn't happen. And if you did do it, you'd serve a 10-second stop and go penalty. But thankfully for Renault, this incident occurred just before the pit window. So basically that meant most of the field were on the back foot and they had to scramble to rethink their strategy. See, with the way the fueling worked, some of them wouldn't be able to make it under the safety car period. So some of them might have had to pit under the safety car to refuel and serve that 10-second time penalty, because otherwise they wouldn't be able to make it for the rest of the race. So after the safety car, Alonso went from 11th, somehow being magically in the top 5. Again, luckily for Alonso, the 4 drivers ahead of him had to serve their stop-and-go penalty for pitting under the safety car, and magically Alonso was in P1 as he finished ahead of Nico Rosberg and Lewis Hamilton. How very strange. How on earth could all these things for a driver who qualified in P15 go so well that he'd win? Now, there's no doubt in my mind that Fernando Alonso isn't a great driver. I'm sure he could do this in most machinery, but the fact is that Renault was so uncompetitive, it seems so strange that he was able to do it, and all the coincidences and strange occurrences which somehow helped him win. But it was the fact that nothing like this had ever really happened before, that no one ever thought that Renault would be involved in something like this, because it never really happened before. It just seemed like one of those shocking winning stories that we get every now and then in Formula 1. Then there's 2009, where Nelson Piquet and Fernando Alonso would be back at it again, and here's where it all went wrong. Nelson Piquet Jr. really disappointed in the first half of the season. He was then sacked by Renault and was replaced by Romain Grosjean. Piquet was outraged by this, and after being sacked, he decided to take revenge on Renault. Enter Crashgate. Piquet told the media that Briatore and Simmons told him to crash on that exact lap at that exact point. This would then help Fernando Alonso pit, ruin everyone else's strategy, and let him coast through to the win. The FIA called the World Motorsport Council meeting immediately as Renault stood trial at the hearing in Paris. But it's strange how 5 days before the hearing even happened, both Briatore and Simmons resigned from Renault with immediate effect. But the hearing still went ahead, and the FIA found Renault guilty, and they were suspended from F1 for 2 years. But Renault were hit hugely in the financial department by this, and they eventually left the sport selling to Lotus. But here's how it changed F1 forever and almost ruined it. This was arguably the last nail in the coffin for Formula 1. We had the Indianapolis Grand Prix, we had Spygate, we had Lewis Hamilton lying to race stewards. All of these things came up in the last 5 years, and it did not look good for Formula 1. Now we have teams manipulating the outcomes of races to win, But thankfully, we've moved on from this, and we haven't seen too many high-profile scandals like this in recent memory. Or have we? Video coming soon.